Right, everyone, so it is on 9 o'clock, so we might as well get started. Small group today, so just for people who are here, Ray and I have a couple of PowerPoint slides that we will run through, and then there is time at the end for questions. But if you have any questions along the way, feel free to pop them in the chat, and then we can get to those. For those who don't know me, my name is Bonnie Eklund. I'm the Manager Program Operations here at TAAHC, and co-presenting with me today is Ray Thomas, who is our Research Education Lead. So I'll just share my screen and get our PowerPoint slides up and running. Yep, everyone can see. So today's information session is for the Tropical Australian Academic Health Centre seed funding scheme. So most of you would be aware, but for those of you who aren't, TAAHC is a research collaboration between the 5 hospital and health services in northern Queensland. So right from the top of Queensland, Torres and Cape, down through to Mackay and out west to northwest. Our collaborators also include the Northern Queensland Primary Health Network, the Queensland Aboriginal Islander Health Council, and James Cook University. So TAAHC's been established formally as a collaboration since 2019. And when TAAHC established, one of the first things that we did together collectively as members was to identify some research themes that would guide our activity. So those research themes are listed on the slide. And the important thing to know about those research themes is they really are in response to what we saw as the key health challenges in the region. So TAAHC is trying to respond to things that are most pressing in our region in terms of health and research need. So these research themes you can find in our TAAHC research strategy. And I'd really encourage you to have a look at our research strategy. It is available on the TAAHC website, and it will become particularly important when you are looking at some of the responding to some of the selection criteria in the seed funding scheme. So our research strategy defines our mission and purpose, and it also just talks a little bit about our aims and actions that we'll take to achieve our mission and purpose. And you can see where our seed funding scheme fits into the overall activity of TAAHC. So like I said, it is available on the TAAHC website. So if you jump on to the website, if you head up to the research tab, you'll see a drop down and that will bring you to the research strategy page. And then you'll be able to take a look at our current research strategy, which runs from this year through to 2026. That's just what our research strategy, the front page of it, looks at, and you can see our purpose and mission there on the top left-hand corner. So the other thing I would really encourage you to have a look at, obviously, if you're thinking of applying to the seed funding scheme, is the funding rules for the scheme. So that pretty much sets out what are the aims and the objectives of the schemes, what are the eligibility criteria, what selection criteria will you need to respond to if you do choose to apply. So I've popped the aim and objective up on those slides. I won't read through them all, but I think the key things to note there, really, when you're thinking about the seed funding, is that it's for translational research projects. And we do want them to be aligned with our TAAHC strategic research theme. So we're looking for translational research in one of those strategic research theme areas, which we saw before. And also they are collaborative. So the idea is that we want to encourage collaboration across our members for translational research within our strategic research themes. And we would like that collaborative research to be able to eventually access external funding sources. So it is about essentially growing the pie of research that's happening across TAAHC. Again, another thing that when you look at the funding rules, which can be accessed on our website, I highly encourage you to look at the eligibility criteria for the seed funding scheme. And you will note there that having your research align with one of our strategic research themes, one or more, is a eligibility criteria. So you will need to demonstrate front up that your research does align with our strategic research themes. And it also does state as an eligibility that your project must be a collaboration between 3 or more TAAHC members. So we will do an initial eligibility check on all applications that are submitted to TAAHC. And applications that are deemed ineligible won't go through to your peer review round, to the peer review process. So just really important to double check those eligibilities and really noting that, alignment with our themes, that it is a collaboration is an eligibility criteria for this round. So I think our next slide takes us through the selection criteria for the seed funding scheme. So I'll hand over to Ray to talk us through those.
Yeah, so just to keep you focused on what the selection criterion are. So we're just going to go through each one of those. Now, really big tip is to download the funding rules and the online preview application as well, right? So these slides that you're going to see that talk about the selection criterion individually, they've taken from both of those places, okay? So make sure that you have a look at both of those places, particularly like even the online preview form. It'll actually tell you how many words you've got to use. So just know about that before you start writing. Read it, understand it. So the project impact is worth 40%, right? We really want to know about how your research outputs are going to contribute meaningful advances in our region, right? We want to know in this particular criterion how you're going to address a systemic and significant healthcare issue. And we want to know how it's going to align. We keep saying that. If we keep saying it, heads up, it's important, right? So how also are you going to, how is your program going to drive a change in our region? How is it going to help us be more equitable in our health outcomes in policy and or practice? In this criterion too, we actually want you to talk about your project outcomes. And here's the clincher. You need to say that up to 700 words. Thanks, Bonnie. Project methodology is worth 25%, right? Here in this part, we want you to tell us what is your research question? What is it that you're actually trying to solve? And we want to tell you how, we want you to tell us how are you going to do it. So what is the purpose? What is the proposed approach? How are you going to do that? What kind of tools are you going to use? Participants are you going to use? Controls, statistical approaches? How are you going to collect the data? All of that stuff in the project methodology section is what we want to know. We want to know, as Bonnie mentioned too, this is called seed funding. That actually literally means we're giving you some money in the hope that you will collect some pilot data so that you can go on and get bigger funding, right? So how will your project generate quality pilot data that's going to help you get to the next grant that you want to get to? And what are your intended future funding applications? So really kind of clearly tell us what you're going to do about that in 500 words or less. Thanks, Bonnie. For 25%, we also want you to tell us about capacity, capability, and resources. Are you the right people to deliver it? Do you have the right number of skills in your team? If you're going to do something that's bespoke, then how are you going to do that? And who are the critical members in your team that you need in order to get that done? How have they contributed to and been involved with the translation or implementation of research findings? All about who and how are the people in your team, and can you deliver it? Convince us up to 500 words. Thanks, Bonnie. And as Bonnie said, this is about collaboration and partnership. TAAHC is about making sure that the region grows together. So we want you to also tell us about how your project facilitates partnerships and collaborations across our members. Do go to the eligibility, because that's really important. And how do you strengthen capacity across our members with reference to our purpose and our mission? And you've got 250 words to tell us about that. Okay, thanks, Bonnie. All of you must actually make sure that you address Indigenous research excellence criteria from the NH and MRC. It might be that your project doesn't use these criteria, but you still have to tell us and you have to articulate why it does not, all right? But we will want to know about just how you can demonstrate substantial community engagement, benefits, sustainability and transferability and capacity building if you do engage with Indigenous communities. Thanks, Bonnie. Parts of the submission form that are not in the selection criteria. So this is probably really helpful. This is why I'm telling you to download both of those things, right? You don't want to be surprised 2 minutes before deadline, okay? You have to provide a short project summary up to 100 words. You will be asked to tick boxes about which of our strategic research streams align with your project. You've got to tell us about your deliverables, the milestones that you're going to do. How are you going to involve consumers? What is your budget? And what's the justification of your budget? So your budget will be in a table and your justification of your budget will be up to 200 words. You will need letters of support and there will be references attached to for particularly things like your background, your project, things like that. Thanks, Connie. So some general tips. Oh, goodness, start early, right? Writing grants is a skill, start early, and so then you can get to revise. Download and read the Smarty Grants form before the due date and before you start to write. Know our strategic research streams. Make your application meaningful to those streams. Write for a person who is not knowledgeable in your area, okay? So there will be lots of people reviewing these grants who won't particularly know the actual area that you're working in. So make sure that you write for people who are knowledgeable, but not particularly knowledgeable in your area. Also, because you're going to start early, because that's a tip, get feedback from a critical friend. Don't bother sending it to someone who's going to tell you, yeah, that's good. Get feedback from a critical friend, because I can't tell you how much value that actually adds. And then when you get feedback from that critical friend, revise your grant and then revise it again. Thanks, Bonnie.
Thanks, Ray. So as Ray has mentioned a couple of times now, hopefully people picked up on that, we do suggest that you download the application preview form. So if you head on to the TAAHC website, so just Google TAAHC or it's taahc.org.au, when you get to our website, you'll see the research tab, research support tab. You'll click on that research funding, and then you can click on either seed funding or clinician researcher fellowships, depending on which one you apply. And you'll see a link there to Smarty Grants. So Smarty Grants is our online application form, and its kind of front page looks like this. And you'll see three things. So if you're feeling very game, you can head right in, start your submission, off and running. You can also preview the form here where the magnifying glass is, and that will give you an basically opens up a web page which allows you to just have a quick scroll through the application form. Or there's this final option, download preview form, which is probably the one that I would run with, and that actually allows you to download the application form as a PDF. So you can then look through that, prepare your application offline, and then when you're ready, you can jump back in and click start your submission and transfer into the online form. We have found Smarty Grants to be pretty easy to use for both our applicants and our reviewers. We haven't really come across any major issues, but if you do, you can definitely get in touch with me. So either at taahc@gcu.edu.au or through my office phone number, which is all on that front page of the Smarty Grants application form. So if there are any issues, please get in touch with us, and usually we should be able to sort those out, but I wouldn't expect that anyone would have any major problems submitting their application. So the final part of our session today was focused on, we've already received some questions about the seed funding scheme that we thought it would be useful for everyone to be aware of. So we'll run through these FAQs now. These are also available on our TAAHC website, along with a copy of these PowerPoint slides. We also already have up there the recording from our previous session, and the recording for this information session will go up on our website as well. So one of the questions that we had was around what is meant by duplicate funding in section 2.4 of our funding rules. So if you download those funding rules and have a look through, you'll see in that section 2.4 that it says that whilst TAAHC recognises that applicants may hold funding from multiple funding sources, TAAHC won't duplicate funding for any research project. And really what we mean by that is that we're very aware that researchers will be trying to manage costs for their overall program of work for multiple funding sources, but we do expect that the piece of research or the research activity that TAAHC is funding, that it is sufficiently different from any other research that you're doing that has been funded by another source. And so really when we say sufficiently different, what we're talking about is that we don't really want any scientific overlap. So the specific research objective or question or hypothesis and the experimental design for achieving that objective should be different from any other research project that you've received funding for. We also expect that there shouldn't be any budgetary overlap. So if you've already asked for one FTE research technician and that's been funded from another research source, we wouldn't then expect to see the same research technician being requested for funding from a TAAHC funding grant. And also that it goes on to that next one in terms of commitment overlap. So if someone is already one FTE on a research project, we wouldn't then expect to see that we should fund a request for funding for above that one FTE. And so that issue of duplicate funding obviously only comes up really if your application is successful. So when we send the outcome letter to successful applicants before we can, when you're asked to say, yes, I do want to proceed with this grant, you will be asked whether there's any duplication of funding and you'll need to tell us that there isn't. And that really should just be, a straightforward yes or no, or if you do think that there's something that might fall into that category, explain to us why it isn't actually a duplication of funding. And like I said, we are very aware that researchers manage their costs across multiple projects. And so we are aware that this research will fit into may fit into a larger program of work, but we do just need to know that we are funding a very specific research activity that's not been funded elsewhere before. So we've also had some questions around how salary costs can be used. So seed funding we don't provide salary for investigators, but we do allow people to put into their budget requests for salary costs for dedicated research or technical staff to support the project. So there's been some questions around, can this be through an existing staff member's contract? So maybe you might want to put in a budget request for them to work some additional FTE above their existing hours, up to 100% obviously. Can anyone employed on the project, where do they have to be employed? Does it have to be through the lead organisation? So all applicants are asked to identify a lead organisation in their application, or can it be in another TAAHC member? And how can the salary costs be used? So do they need to support someone, for a set piece of time every week, or can it be in a compressed block? So what we would say to that is, we do ask when you submit your budget, you will be asked to justify that budget. So to explain to us why you need what you've requested and ideally how that contributes to achieving your overall research objective. And provided that you use your funding as you've described to us, so as per your budget, when it comes down to individual employment contract arrangements, so hours of work, what is their employing organisation, what is their FTE, we leave that for the responsibility of the lead organisation. So TAAHC won't dictate the individual employment arrangements of staff. But our baseline is that you are spending the budget as you've described to us, but individual arrangements definitely up to the discretion of the lead organisation and the project team. So one of the other questions we've had is around what defines a collaboration. So we've already spoken about that earlier, but it is both an eligibility requirement that your application is a collaboration between 3 or more TAAHC members. And it is also something that you need to address in the selection criteria. So we do ask you to describe how your application or your project fosters collaboration and partnership across the project team members. So I'll answer that question really in 2 parts. So in terms of meeting eligibility requirements, if you have 3 investigators listed as part of your investigative team, and each of those investigators are from a different TAAHC member, then you will meet, then you will meet that eligibility requirement of your project being a collaboration between 3 or more TAAHC members. The other thing to note there is 2 of our, so you'll find a list of our TAAHC members on the TAAHC website. So we do have 8 members. And sorry, everyone coughing into the Zoom. And so 2 of our members are the Northern Queensland Primary Health Network and the Queensland Aboriginal and Islander Health Organisation, Quake. And those members are really what we'd say, advisory or representative bodies. So what we've said is that if one of your investigators is a general practice provider in the North Queensland region, or they work for a Aboriginal and a Torres Strait Islander community controlled organisation, we'll consider those investigators to be affiliated either with the NQPHN if you're a general practice provider, or with Quake if you're investigators from the Aboriginal and Islander community controlled organisation. So that's the eligibility aspect of it. When it comes to the selection criteria, referencing collaboration and partnership, what we're really looking for is that you need to articulate how the project will facilitate partnership and collaboration. So, okay, just say you've got investigators from Townsville, Cairns and Northwest Hospital and Health Service. Great, you've met our eligibility criteria. But in the selection criteria, if you to score highly against that, you need to actually tell us how are those investigators working together? How is this a collaboration and partnership between those TAAHC members? So we'll be looking for details on that so that the peer review panel can make that assessment. So that was the last of the FAQs. I will now stop talking and give people a chance if there are any questions that you would like to throw up, either pop them in the chat or feel free to yell out, and I'll just stop sharing so that we can go through our questions.
Hey, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So in one of the earlier slides, you mentioned that consumer involvement is important. And that's something I was wondering since I arrived in Townsville at JCU. There isn't not something like a consumer advocate group or consumer panel in place at the hospital or at the university. So is there any plans to install such a consumer group, or do we just reach out to individual consumers?
Do you want to take that one, Ray, or I can?
Sure. The hospital does have consumer involvement. Somebody's certainly Townsville Hospital. I can speak for that.
Okay.
They do have consumer involvement. I would suggest to you that in order to meet the criteria about collaboration across partnerships, there will be a lot of people who actually work within consumer organisations and consumer involvement if you go outside of that space. But you're right. Overall, I think that consumer involvement is a little bit thin on the ground, but I think everybody's moving much more closer to that end goal. But Townsville does have a consumer group involved, and so will many of the other HHSs, and so will a lot of the Aboriginal controlled organisations and PHN.
Okay.
And the only thing I would say to that is it is an issue that TAAHC is aware of, and obviously within the sector there is much more of a focus on consumer and community engagement. So I guess watch this space in terms of TAAHC, but definitely in terms of the seed funding, it probably is something that you would need to reach out individually and you know work across your networks.
Okay. Yep.
Kylie, I'm sorry, I don't understand your question. Ask for the standard 2 meeting. Is that
so there's national standards that each HHS has to comply to, and standard 2 is consumers. And so when people are seeking to find out the pathway for consumer engagement, it's a good idea to ask for the meeting in relation to standard 2, and then that will give you the meeting. It's just probably different languages used within the HHSs and outside the HHSs. So, and there is there's also a patient safety and a consumer response group. So when people have complaints, etc. Just seek those areas out in Townsville.
Thanks, Kylie. I didn't know that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, and thank you so much, Ray and Bonnie. My question is, for example, if we have collaborators from Cairns and other TAAHC members, but our participants will be recruited in Townsville. So can we stay, for example, preparation, collaboration for future bigger grants as part of the collaboration?
So I guess as long as you have, so in terms of the eligibility, if you do have investigators from your, 3 or more TAAHC members, you will meet that. I guess if you're saying your participants will be recruited outside the TAAHC region, so outside North Queensland?
No, in Townsville. But I have
just in
collaborators,
Townsville.
for example, from Cairns, Mackay.
Yeah. So the selection criteria around partnership and collaboration is definitely where you would need to outline that. And I guess the thing I would say is you would just need to explain very clearly to the peer review process that, yes, your participants might be in Townsville, but how are you still working collaboratively across the members? So it might be that the plan might be that, first phase of recruitment is Townsville, then you might be able to extend to your other members, or why it's of benefit to Cairns, or your other members around that town's recruitment. There might still be lessons learned, but that would be my advice, that you might still be eligible, but with that selection criteria, you just really need to clearly demonstrate, how that collaboration is beneficial with just those participants on one slide. Ray, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I thought that was a good one. Yeah, it doesn't, we have been silent on where the participants need to come from, but it's your investigators and how you use your investigators. So it speaks to the skill mix, but it also speaks to that capacity building across Northern Queensland.
Thank you.
No worries. Any other questions? Kerry? Yep.
Hi, thank you. I was just wondering, do you think it would be appropriate to apply for the seed funding if you're doing a project that is dependent on a larger amount of funding to come through? So while it definitely aligns with everything to be successful, there's some big sort of capital outlay that needs to be purchased, which obviously wouldn't be through this funding. So I'm trying to understand if perhaps, if you can put in an application that would be dependent on a further round of funding.
Yeah, look, I wouldn't want to give you a clear yes or no, you can't apply. But I would say that I think the question for the peer review panel would be, okay, what happens if you're successful in one but not the other? So I think you would definitely need to address that in your application. So when you're talking through, either in the project methodology or perhaps in, I think, project impact and outcomes, where you're talking about what the process might be, you would need to definitely address that. And I would say that the peer review panel would probably be looking for, when they're assessing project outcomes, some certainty around, well, your project outcomes may not happen if this, doesn't happen, which may or may not be out of your control. So that would be something I think of, is just that in terms of actually assessing that selection criteria around impact and outcomes, you would somehow need to, I guess, my inclination would be, explain the process. And do you have is there another route to achieving your project outcomes if you don't get that funding? That's probably what the peer review panel would look for.
And it speaks to the criteria about capacity, capability, and resources to deliver, right? So you're really going to have to articulate, exactly what Bonnie said, what if, and at the moment, you don't have the resources to deliver. You're waiting and depending. So so you'll have to be really super clear on that. But you're right, it's a really tricky situation, which comes first, the chicken or the egg. We understand, we get it, we've all been there. But it'll be about how do you craft it, because we will want to know, well, if you're successful, because somebody else won't be successful. If you're successful, it means somebody else isn't. That's the way it goes. Only got a bucket of money. How are you going to be able to deliver that without some key infrastructure potentially?
And I apologize that I don't know this off the top of my head, but is there some rough timelines around results of this?
Yeah, so applications close 3rd of July. We are hoping to be able to announce outcomes in late November for early 2024 project start dates.
That's exactly the same as the other funding. July 27th, outcome November.
Yeah, we're pains in the butt, aren't we? Sorry.
I know, it's a problem when you align with the sector, yeah. But look, I would, I see where you're coming from, and I guess, personally, if you don't submit, you don't know. But yeah, you've already flagged it. It will be something that the peer review panel will pick up on, as I said, capacity and capability, and in the project outcomes.
Thank you. Thank you.
No.
I have a question regarding, excuse me, regarding duplicates of fundings. As you know, as researchers, we submit grant applications through every possible chances. So if we haven't got the grants, so we are still eligible to submit for TAAHC, which means we haven't got the grants from other sources. Is that right?
No, so you are still eligible to submit if you do have grant funding from other sources. That's fine. It's just if you are successful in getting TAAHC funding, we will ask you before we can provide you with that funding. We will just ask that this isn't duplicating another grant that you might have. So I guess there's two things to that we're concerned about. One is that, the more straightforward case, you've submitted the same, substantially the same application to a couple of funding rounds, and you're just wanting to see which one you get. So, if you're successful in TAAHC, but you've already been successful to have that project funded, say through, I don't know, might be the Emergency Medicine Foundation, then you would need to say, no, actually this application has already been funded, decline TAAHC funding. I guess the more complicated case is, obviously people have their overall programs of work. So someone might be looking at, I don't know, using, X drug to treat diabetes in North Queensland. And so they might have submitted an application to one round, which is looking at that drug in this population. And then for TAAHC, they might have put in an application to look at it in this population. So you would just need to explain to us, how there is a different research question happening there, and that, there isn't actually a duplication of funding. Does that make sense, Wendy?
Yes, yeah. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Any
Sorry,
other
I'm just
questions?
writing. I'm just writing your questions down to make sure that we put them on our thing. So that's why I'm writing.
Can I just check as well, sort of along that, it's not counted as federal or Commonwealth funding, is it? The TAAHC funding?
No, so it's not federal Commonwealth. If you're in the university sector, I think it will come in as, if you're under the herticals, it will either come in as Cat 2 or Cat 3 funding. So it's other funding. So it is competitive external funding. So if you are in the university sector, it will be counted in when they do those hertic collections, and part of university block grant funding, it will contribute to that, but not federal or Commonwealth, no.
I have another question.
Yeah, sure.
On my hat of the ADR for my college. Some researcher asked me, it seems that this year the micro grant is not available this year.
No, that's correct. So last year, TAAHC committed to reviewing our suite of funding. So we used to offer 4 funding schemes: seed funding, clinician research fellowship funding, micro grants, and research assistant funding. So we reviewed that scheme. So we went out to our members, did stakeholder consultations, and what came out of that review was that the seed funding was very valuable across organisations. The clinical researcher fellowships were very well received, particularly in the bigger TAAHC members. But that research assistant and micro grant weren't really fit for purpose for what our members were looking for. And we did actually have quite a low volume of applications. So the TAAHC board made the decision that they would go ahead with just 2 funding schemes, seed funding and clinician. And we've essentially retired the micro grant and the research assistant. So they won't be coming up again, Wendy. Yeah. So any more questions? No? Okay. If there is any more questions, feel free to get in touch with us through taahc@jcu.edu.au. Our website is also the go-to place for any and all information TAAHC related. So we'll pop up a recording of this session, our FAQs, and we'll update them with some of the questions that have been asked here today. And you'll also be able to download the PowerPoint slides. But thank you all for attending. I hope you found it useful, and I hope we see some applications from you.
Thank
you
so much for the
everyone.
presentation.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very much.
Thank you.